Just a nurse. That's what they whispered when Sarah Chen moved through the hallways of Seattle General. They didn't know. They had no idea who was standing in front of them, moving through those corridors at midnight in worn scrubs and orthopedic shoes, her movements so efficient they barely registered as human presence. They saw a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and tired eyes. They didn't see the Silver Star citation locked in a box under her Jacksonville apartment floor. They didn't see the 18-month deployment to Helmand Province. They didn't see that she'd carried 2 wounded Rangers 3 kilometers under sustained fire because some orders were meant to be broken. The fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual mechanical hymn above Sarah's head as she moved through the 4th-floor corridor, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. Her scrubs were faded blue, the color washed out from 700 washings, the hem threadbare from 3 years of motion. She wheeled the medication cart with one hand, her other checking vitals on the tablet, heart rates, O2 saturation levels, blood pressures. All stable. All contained. All exactly as they should be at 2:11 a.m. on a Thursday night at Seattle General's night shift, where the broken and the dying came when there was nowhere else to go. Her fingers brushed across the scar on her forearm as she reviewed patient charts, a habit she'd never managed to break. The scar tissue ran from wrist to elbow, pale white and thick, the result of shrapnel that had come close enough to matter. She'd stitched herself up in a forward operating base with a needle meant for field sutures and shaking hands, and then she'd gone back out into the helm and dust because that's what Rangers did. That's what you did when people depended on you. Now in Jacksonville, in this fluorescent hallway at 2:24 a.m., that scar was just a story nobody asked to hear. Just a line on a body that belonged to just a nurse. The ER intercom crackled at 2:53 a.m. The sound came through the speakers like a voice breaking through water. Sarah's head lifted automatically, the way it always did. 16 years of habit, even buried under a new name, even buried under credentials that were half true and half fiction. She heard the dispatcher's voice, clipped and professional, incoming trauma. Highway accident, vehicle versus utility pole. 3-minute ETA. Prepare trauma bay 1 and 2. She didn't move immediately. That was part of the protocol. She let the doctors make their moves first, let the hierarchy of the hospital establish itself. She was just a nurse on the night shift, and night shift nurses didn't lead. Night shift nurses responded when directed. Night shift nurses were invisible until they were needed. The ER doors below would be opening. She could feel it through the building itself, that shift in air pressure when emergency medicine went live. The automatic doors sliding open with their pneumatic hiss. The paramedics coming through with a stretcher, their voices sharp and clipped, the language of trauma teams who'd seen this script 1,000 times. Sarah finished her charting and began moving toward the stairs without conscious thought, her body already knowing what her mind was trying to suppress. Curiosity. The old instinct to be useful. The part of her that still remembered Helmand. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 2:56 a.m., and the night shift changed. Sarah was 3 floors down before she fully registered the decision to move. The ER hummed with controlled chaos, nurses pulling on gloves, residents rushing toward the bays, the paramedics calling out vitals with the rhythm of people who'd done this 1,000 times. 41-year-old female, unresponsive on scene, ejection from driver's side, initial GCS of 5, now alert and responding. BP 118/72, heart rate 98, O2 sat 94 on room air. Blunt force trauma to the head and upper left quadrant. We had to use hydraulic spreaders to get her out. The stretcher rolled past, and Sarah watched it move into trauma bay 1. She could see the patient's face for only a moment, dark hair matted with blood, skin pale under the emergency lighting, but the features were visible enough. Visible enough to make Sarah's breath catch in her chest like a hook had caught it from the inside. Colonel Victoria Ashford. The woman who'd court-martialed Major Sarah Chen at Forward Operating Base Solano on a Tuesday morning in Helmand Province, the woman who'd decided that disobeying orders in the service of keeping 2 Rangers alive was a violation worthy of breaking a career over. The woman who'd testified at Sarah's hearing that insubordination during combat was a threat to military discipline itself, that rank structure existed for a reason, that soldiers who didn't follow orders couldn't be trusted to carry weapons. The woman whose testimony should have ended Sarah Chen's military career forever. Except Sarah hadn't died in Helmand. She'd survived the court-martial. She'd been acquitted on appeal when the two rangers she'd refused to abandon testified about what had actually happened that night. They told the truth about Ashford's order to leave them to the Taliban because extraction was tactically unsound. They told the truth about a major who'd said no and meant it. And then the Pentagon, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that a decorated ranger officer who'd violated the chain of command, even righteously, was a liability. They'd offered her a choice, permanent quiet assignment, or something better. They'd offered her a new name. They'd offered her Jacksonville. They'd offered her the chance to disappear. Now that colonel was being rolled into Seattle General's trauma bay, and Sarah's hands had gone completely cold. She stood at the edge of the ER floor, watching the paramedics transfer Ashford from their stretcher to the hospital gurney. The woman's eyes were open, her consciousness swimming back through whatever chemical fog the accident had induced. Her head turned slowly, her eyes moving across the room with the disoriented gaze of someone trying to reconstruct reality. The emergency lights cast harsh shadows across her face. For a moment, Sarah was back in Helmand, back in the tent where Ashford had read the charge of insubordination into the record with the kind of precision that left no room for interpretation. Then Ashford's eyes found Sarah's. The recognition was instantaneous. Sarah saw it happen in real time, the widening of pupils, the sharp intake of breath, the way Ashford's hand tensed against the stretcher's safety rail. For one long moment, neither of them moved. The ER continued its orchestrated chaos around them. Residents called out orders. Nurses pulled cut clothes away from the patient. The trauma team did their work with mechanical precision. But between Sarah and the woman on the stretcher, the air had gone thick and heavy with the weight of 7 years. "I need a neuro check," someone called out. "Get her head immobilized. We need a CT of the face and neck." Ashford's eyes never left Sarah's. In them, Sarah saw the exact moment the confusion gave way to understanding. The moment Victoria Ashford remembered a major in a tent in Helmand Province. The moment she understood that the major had a new name and scrubs and was standing in a Jacksonville hospital at 3 in the morning. The moment their war came home. Sarah turned away. She moved back toward the stairs with the same invisible efficiency that had gotten her through 3 years of night shifts, the same quiet competence that made her disappear into the background of the hospital's machinery. Her hands, which had once carried wounded rangers through smoke and dust, which had held together the bleeding and the dying, remained perfectly steady. Her breathing never changed. Her pulse, if anyone had been monitoring it, would have shown only the slight elevation that came with any emergency code. She'd learned long ago that survival required composure. Composure required invisibility. Invisibility required forgetting who you'd been before the new identity was stitched around you like grafted skin. But as she climbed the stairs back to the 4th floor, back to the medication cart and the routine charts and the quiet work of a night shift nurse named Sarah Chen, she touched the scar on her arm again. And for the first time in 3 years, she understood exactly what she'd been running from. The woman in Trauma Bay 1 had finally caught up. The morning shift started like every other morning at Seattle General, except it didn't. Sarah arrived at the nurse's station at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes early like always, and found Dr. Ashford standing there with Sarah's charting notes spread across the counter like evidence at a crime scene. Ashford's lip curled as she read, her fingers trailing across the pages with deliberate slowness, and when she looked up, her eyes held something worse than anger. They held certainty. The certainty of a predator who'd finally cornered its prey. "Nurse Chen," Ashford said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Your documentation is sloppy." "Again?" Sarah didn't respond. Didn't need to. She'd learned years ago that silence was a weapon people didn't know how to fight. Ashford pulled a printed sheet from her pocket, pre-written, Sarah noticed, not spontaneous, and walked to the public bulletin board where staff schedules and policy changes were posted. She used a red marker to write across the top in letters large enough to be read from the hallway, improper charting. Remedial training required. Below that, Nurse Sarah Chen. The date. Ashford's initials. Then she stepped back, surveyed her work like an artist, and walked away without another word. The board faced the break room. Everyone would see it. Everyone would know. Sarah picked up her assignment clipboard with steady hands. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was 3 years of muscle memory telling her exactly what this woman deserved, and the part of her that had learned to survive by disappearing screaming back down into the dark. She clipped the papers to her chest and moved toward the unit. Work. Just work. That was all she had left. By 8 a.m., Sarah sat in the break room with a coffee she didn't want, black, no sugar, the kind that tasted like exhaust fumes and regret. The refrigerator hummed its mechanical song. The microwave's clock ticked forward in green lead numbers. She sat at the corner table, the one that faced the wall, the one where you could see people coming but they had to look twice to see you. 3 nurses entered. Sarah recognized them: Martinez, who'd smiled at her once 3 weeks ago; Chen, no relation, who'd held the door; Okafor, who'd asked about her weekend. All of them good people. All of them human. They moved to the coffee station, saw Sarah, and something flickered across their faces. Recognition. Calculation. Survival instinct. They exchanged glances, the kind that didn't need words, and grabbed their drinks without speaking. Not hostile. Worse. Invisible. They left the way they'd come, and the break room door swung shut with a soft pneumatic hiss. Sarah stared at her coffee. The surface was perfectly still. 2 hours later, the same 3 nurses came in again during their lunch break. They saw her. They left. No eye contact. No acknowledgement. Just the scrape of chairs being pulled back and the soft click of the door closing on her solitude. Sarah didn't move. Didn't flinch. The afternoon shift came through at 2 p.m., and when Martinez walked in and saw Sarah at that corner table, her face did something complicated, pity mixed with fear mixed with the human instinct to distance yourself from contamination. She grabbed her yogurt and left in under 30 seconds. By 3 p.m., Sarah understood. Ashford hadn't just written her up. Ashford had made her a ghost. The kind of ghost that haunted people with guilt. Stay away from her and maybe you won't get infected. Maybe your reputation won't catch what she's got. This was stage 2 of the erosion. Sarah had seen it before, in different uniforms, in different countries. You didn't destroy people with one blow. You dismantled them piece by piece, isolation cell by isolation cell, until they stopped believing in their own right to exist in the same room as other people. But that wasn't the worst part. Sarah was updating the chart for room for 12 when she heard Ashford's voice in the hallway, sharp and cutting, the kind of voice that made the fluorescent light seem to dim. The patient in for 12 was a ranger, no ID, no family listed, just a dog tag on a broken chain and hand scarred in ways Sarah recognized. But his daughter had arrived yesterday. A young woman in dress army fatigues, second lieutenant by her insignia, jaw tight with a kind of controlled fear that military families understood. Lieutenant Reeves had been by his bedside every afternoon, holding his hand, whispering things Sarah couldn't hear but could read on her lips. Dad, surgery, you're going to be okay. Sarah was updating vitals when Ashford stormed in. Not walked. Stormed. Like a frontline advancing. She wore her white coat unbuttoned, power casual, the way people dressed when they'd already decided how the scene would end. She saw Sarah's assessment clipboard on the bedside table. Sarah had just updated it, hours of careful observation documented in meticulous detail, respiratory function, mental status, pain response, infection markers, the whole architecture of healing that Sarah had spent 3 years learning to do invisibly. Ashford didn't ask. Didn't hesitate. She reached across the bed, ripped the clipboard from Sarah's hands hard enough that the pen attached to the chain swung and clattered against the metal bed frame. The sound was like a gunshot in a small space. Lieutenant Reeves looked up from her father's hand, her face flushing. This nurse is too incompetent to be trusted with critical cases, Ashford announced to the room, to the patient, to the daughter, to anyone listening. Her voice was loud enough to carry into the hallway. I'll be assigning someone qualified to his care from now forward. Nurse Chen, you're reassigned. Sarah stood there. The clipboard was gone. Her observations, documented. Her competence, annihilated. The daughter's jaw tightened, and Sarah watched her calculate, protest and risk her father's care, or stay silent and watch a nurse get destroyed on his behalf. The family always chose the same way. They always looked away. Sarah took one measured breath. In through her nose. Hold. She felt the tear forming before it fell, right at the edge of her left eye, and she didn't try to stop it. Let it come. She watched it drop onto her scrubs, a small dark circle on the blue fabric, and then she looked directly at Ashford. Eye contact. Unflinching. The tear glistened on her cheek and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, slow, deliberate, like she was removing something someone else had put there. I've kept worse men than you alive, Doctor, Sarah said quietly. Her voice was so soft the daughter had to lean forward to hear it, but Ashford heard it perfectly. Ashford heard every syllable. And I'll keep your patients alive too. Even when you're not watching. Ashford's jaw tightened. A muscle pulsed at her temple. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe, or fear, or the sudden realization that she might have miscalculated something fundamental about the woman standing in front of her. But she recovered fast. She always did. She turned on her heel and left, her footsteps sharp and angry against the tile. Lieutenant Reeve stared at Sarah for a long moment. Then she looked down at her father's hand and squeezed it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The next shift schedule posted at midnight. Sarah found it in her email because she couldn't face checking the break room board again. COVID unit. Graveyard rotation. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. The rotation that meant she'd be isolated from day staff, from patient families, from anyone who might see her or hear her name. The rotation that meant she'd be alone with the dying and the machines that kept count of every failing second. Her system access was downgraded that same night. When she logged in at 11 p.m. for her first shift on the COVID unit, her permissions had been restricted to basic charting only. No access to controlled substance tracking. No access to pharmaceutical logs. No access to anything that mattered. She was a ghost now, and ghosts couldn't access anything that required a real person's clearance. Sarah moved through the ward in silence. The COVID unit at night was a different world, machines breathing for people who couldn't, monitors beeping their endless rhythm, the smell of antiseptic and something underneath it that everyone pretended not to notice. Death was a smell. Everyone who'd worked long enough learned to recognize it. Not the absence of life. The presence of something leaving. She was charting near the pharmaceutical storage room at 2:23 a.m. when she heard voices. Low. Careful. The door to the storage area was open just enough, and Sarah could see a sliver of the hallway inside. Ashford. And a man. Expensive suit, expensive watch, the kind of posture that came from knowing people and systems bowed to his presence. They were talking about shipments. Log changes. Delivery schedules that didn't match invoice numbers. The man, business card said pharmaceutical rep, Gregory Mills, was pointing to a binder with marked pages, and Ashford was nodding, making notes on a pad that she pocketed immediately after. Sarah didn't move. Didn't breathe louder than the ventilators surrounding her. She watched for exactly 42 seconds, then she slipped her phone from her pocket and photographed the interaction through the door crack. Timestamp included. Date logged. Evidence preserved. When they left, Mills first, Ashford lingering to check that the storage area was secure, Sarah stood in the dim hallway and understood the next phase of what was happening. This wasn't just personal. This was systematic. Ashford was stealing. Moving controlled substances through backdoor channels, shifting inventory numbers, padding pharmaceutical orders. And she'd recognized Sarah not as a ghost but as a threat. Someone who might see. Someone who might remember things about orders and follow procedures. So Ashford was erasing her. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah documented everything. The pharmaceutical meetings. The restricted access. The reassignments that moved her to different floors mid-shift, always when Ashford needed to meet with Mills. She heard fragments of conversation through cracked doors. The nurse. Chen. I'm arranging a transfer. Next week. Can the board move faster? I'm calling a contact. Problem employee. Disciplinary review. When will she be gone? The Ranger patient, room for 12, was deteriorating. His sepsis markers were climbing. His vitals were trending wrong. Sarah could see the trajectory from her downgraded access to basic charting, could read the story his numbers told. He needed aggressive intervention. He needed someone watching his every breath. But Ashford had locked Sarah out of his care entirely now, and the day nurses didn't know him like Sarah did. And then, at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, Sarah found a new sign-in sheet on the COVID unit. The Ranger had been moved to the ICU. His condition was critical. His daughter had been notified. The system had finally noticed what Ashford's cruelty had missed. The system had saved him. But Sarah understood what was happening in the spaces between the paperwork. Ashford was moving faster now. The calls were becoming urgent. The eradication was entering its final phase. And she had no idea what was about to walk through those doors. Sarah had stopped sleeping. Not because she couldn't, her body still demanded the mechanics of rest after 12-hour shifts, but because the evidence never slept. Every night at 2:48 a.m., the pharmaceutical rep arrived through the loading dock. Every night at 3:15 a.m., Dr. Ashford met him in the basement pharmacy corridor where the surveillance camera had a blind spot the size of a delivery truck. Sarah logged the dates in a burner notebook, wrote down times, vehicle descriptions, the names on the invoices that didn't match the hospital's official purchasing records. 147 vials of fentanyl. 58 boxes of oxycodone. 300 milligrams of morphine moved through back channels like water through a broken dam, and Ashford's signature appeared on documents that said they never left the locked cabinet. She documented it all from her designated exile in the break room, sneaking access to the hospital's supply inventory system using a borrowed badge, a move that would have earned her immediate termination if she'd been caught, but termination was coming anyway. The difference was timing. Sarah needed to understand the architecture of the theft before she made any moves. She'd learned that much from Helmand. Never engage until you understand the terrain. Ashford sensed something had shifted. The doctor's moves became surgical after that first week of logging. On Tuesday, Sarah's system access was restricted. She could no longer pull charts from the hallway terminals. By Wednesday, her shift rotation had been shuffled again, moved from 2000 to 0100, swapping her with a float nurse who asked no questions and kept her head down. Thursday brought a phone call Sarah overheard from outside Ashford's office, the hospital board, scheduled transfer conversation, paperwork already being drafted. Ashford's voice through the door was patient, almost reasonable. She's competent enough for basic care, but we need to be honest about her limitations. I'm recommending she be moved to the urgent care satellite across town. Better for everyone involved. Better for Ashford. That was the calculation. Remove Sarah from the building, remove the person who'd seen the pattern, remove the complication. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Ashford had already done this once, made her disappear, buried her under a false name and fabricated credentials. Now the doctor was trying to do it again, this time legally. Sarah leaned against the break room wall at 0047, watching rain hammer the parking lot outside. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. The trembling wasn't fear, it was restraint, 3 years of holding down a person she'd spent every day trying to forget. A ranger. An operator. A woman who understood consequences and moved toward them instead of away. That person was trying very hard to stay buried. And then the trauma alert came through the intercom at 0108. Incoming. Motor vehicle collision, 3-car pileup on I-95. 1 patient, critical, ETA 8 minutes. Trauma team to Bay 1. Sarah didn't move. She wasn't authorized to respond to trauma alerts anymore. Ashford had made that abundantly clear. But she listened to the controlled chaos that followed, the shriek of the crash cart, the rapid-fire hospital codes, the boots on tile as the trauma team mobilized. 8 minutes. A 3-car pileup meant multiple traumas, meant the team would be split, meant whichever surgeon drew the assignment would be working with reduced support. The ambulance arrived at 0116, sirens cutting through the rain like knives. Sarah heard the doors burst open, heard the EMT report, male patient, early 50s, found unconscious at the scene, severe crush injury to the thorax, 1 dog tag recovered on a broken chain, found clenched in his fist. A dog tag. Not standard EMT documentation. That meant the patient had no wallet, no ID, nothing but a military identifier and the clothes on his back. She moved then. Not toward the trauma bay, Ashford had made that territory off limits, but toward the only place she had access, the hallway terminal outside the break room, using the borrowed badge that hadn't been deactivated yet. Her hands moved on muscle memory, pulling up the incoming patient log, scanning the fields. John Doe. Age estimated 50 to 60. Crush injury, pneumothorax probable, internal bleeding suspected. And then the personal effects section, 1 dog tag on a broken chain, 1 Army Ranger ring, recovered at scene. Sarah's breath caught. An Army Ranger ring didn't appear on civilians. It appeared on men who had earned it, who had survived the selection course, who had operated at the edge of the military's precision. And the dog tag meant his name was documented somewhere, his service confirmed, his identity encoded in stamped military metal. She moved through the hospital corridors without thinking, without authorization, following the hum of the ventilator and the electronic beep of the heart monitor to Bay 1. The trauma team was deep in the case, a first-year resident whose hands were too fast and not steady enough, an attending who was on his phone, Ashford nowhere in sight. The patient lay under surgical lights, chest exposed, 3 lines running, the monitor showing a heart rate spiking toward 150, oxygen saturation climbing but unstable. Sarah positioned herself in the doorway like she'd belonged there all along. The patient's swollen right hand lay open on the blanket. The ring was bronze gold, the size of a man's full commitment to something larger than himself. Sarah stepped closer, not making eye contact with anyone, just moving with the kind of purpose that made people assume you had authorization. The resident was too focused on the assessment to notice. The attending was still on his phone. Sarah reached for the hand, slipped the ring off the swollen finger with the gentleness she reserved for the dying. The inscription was faint inside the band, worn by decades of wear and sun and the friction of desert operations. 2 numbers. Coordinates. Latitude and longitude etched in military precision, 32.5667 degrees north, 65.2500 degrees east. Sarah's vision went white for exactly 2 seconds. That was Sanjin Valley. That was the river crossing. That was the ambush location in Helmand Province where her extraction team had been pinned down for 4 hours, where she'd carried 2 wounded Rangers 3 clicks under fire because Colonel Victoria Ashford had ordered her to leave them behind, ordered her to prioritize the mission over the men, ordered her to move without the wounded because extraction was tactically unsound, and Sarah had refused. She had refused a direct order from a colonel because some decisions were bigger than rank, and the 2 Rangers who should have been left behind had testified at her court-martial that she'd saved their lives. One of them was now lying in Bay 1 with a crush injury and a broken dog tag, unconscious and alone, with no idea that his savior was standing 3 feet away wearing a name that wasn't hers. Sarah pressed the ring back onto his finger with the care of a priest administering last rites. The resident was still struggling with the assessment, his voice too high, his movements too fast. Breath sounds diminished on the left, I think. Or maybe the right. Hard to tell with the swelling. The attending hung up his phone finally, glanced at the monitor, and frowned. Tension pneumothorax. Get a needle decompression kit. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Move. But that wasn't the worst part. The resident fumbled through the equipment tray, hands shaking, and Sarah watched the exact moment he pulled the needle in the wrong size gauge, too small, wouldn't create the pathway needed for a tension pneumothorax, would fail, would waste critical seconds. His incompetence was visible as a physical thing, like watching someone try to pick a lock with a butter knife. Sarah turned to leave the bay. Ashford's rules were absolute. Stay out. Don't touch the case. Don't help. Don't even exist in this space. She made it for steps down the corridor before the monitor alarm screamed. The high-pitched shriek that meant the patient's oxygen saturation had plummeted. 89, 84. 79, the kind of drop that meant a man was drowning in his own blood, that meant a lung had collapsed, that meant Sarah had maybe 2 minutes before this ranger, this man who'd bled for her once, who'd testified that she wasn't a traitor, who'd risked his career to tell the truth about her, flatlined for the last time. Sarah stopped walking. The rain outside the corridor window hammered down like the rotor wash from a Black Hawk, like the sound of a choice being made. The trembling wasn't fear. It was something older and harder and infinitely more dangerous than fear. It was restraint breaking. She walked back into Bay 1. The monitor screamed at 0300. Sarah was 3 minutes into charting a routine admission when the code blue alert lit up the trauma board like a Christmas tree gone wrong. Bay 1. The John Doe Ranger. Internal bleeding. Blood pressure bottoming out. A sucking chest wound that meant air was entering the pleural space faster than his lungs could compensate. She didn't run. Runners panic. She walked. Her legs remembered the muscle memory before her brain caught up, left foot, right foot, the rhythm of a soldier moving toward fire instead of away from it. The trauma resident, a kid named Chen, no relation, different Chen, was already there, hands shaking as he reached for the chest tube kit. His fingers trembled against the stainless steel tray. "You're going to kill him," Sarah said. "Not cruel. Just fact." The resident froze. Around them, the ICU nurses moved in controlled chaos, but Sarah's voice had cut through the noise like a scalpel. "Step back." She didn't ask. Didn't say please. The words came out with the weight of command, and the resident's feet obeyed before his brain could argue. Sarah's hands were already moving. She reached into her scrub pocket, the same pocket where she kept her ID badge and a single MRE from her deployment bag, never fully unpacked, always ready, and pulled out a tan foil wrapper. Her fingers found the trauma shears at her hip, the ones with her initials engraved on the metal. SC. Not Sarah Chen. Not anymore. But the hands holding them remembered everything. "What are you doing?" the resident whispered. Sarah cut the MRE wrapper into a square, her movements fluid as water. Occlusive dressing. She wasn't explaining. She was narrating her own work like she was teaching a class she'd already taught 100 times in a desert that didn't exist anymore. Sucking chest wound. Air's entering the pleural space. Lungs collapsing. Pressure builds. Heart stops. For facts. For sentences. Each one a nail in a coffin if she waited. The ranger's O2 sat was dropping. 94. 89. 82. The monitor beeped in accelerating panic. Sarah's hands moved on their own. She found the wound, a puncture site high on the left anterior chest, right where a steering wheel column through the driver's side door would create maximum damage. Her fingers were steady. She'd held steadier people than this back when steady was the difference between a body coming home in a flag and a body coming home talking. She sealed the wound with the MRE wrapper, taped it down with one hand, and barked at the resident without looking up. Needle decompression. Right now. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. 14-gauge needle. Push it in until you hear air hiss. The resident's hand shook as he grabbed the needle. "I don't. Now." The needle went in. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then came the sound Sarah had been waiting for, the soft hiss of pressurized air escaping, the sound of physics correcting itself, the sound of a lung beginning to re-inflate. The O2 sat climbed. 85. 90. 96. The heart rate steadied from the erratic pattern of a drowning organ to something almost human again. Dr. Ashford appeared in the doorway. She stood there in her white coat, the one with her name embroidered in gold thread and her title printed underneath in letters that meant she ran this place. Her face was composed for exactly 1 second. Then Sarah watched it change. The color drained like someone had pulled a plug. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes, which had been scanning the monitor, locked onto Sarah's hands, still moving, still working, still sealed with the certainty of muscle memory that couldn't be faked. Ashford's mouth opened. Closed. Her hand gripped the doorframe as if the room had started tilting. Sarah didn't acknowledge her. She was busy keeping a man alive. Resident, tube the patient. Size 4.0 endotracheal. He's heading to OR after this massive internal bleed. Get a level 1 rapid infuser running. 2 units O negative, stat. And someone get me a real chest tube kit because this wrapper isn't holding him forever. By 0600, the Ranger was in an operating room with a vascular surgeon who actually knew what she was doing. By 0700, his bleeding was controlled. By 0730, Sarah's suspension letter was being handed to her in the HR office by a director who couldn't look her in the eye. Practicing outside your scope of licensure, the letter read. 7 words that meant everything was ending. Immediate suspension pending investigation by the State Board. Sarah signed the acknowledgement form without speaking. The director explained something about protocol and supervision and regulations, but the words were just noise. What mattered was the security card being deactivated at her badge. What mattered was watching hospital security escort her to her locker while another guard opened it and photographed every item, her backup scrubs, her water bottle, the envelope with her mortgage statement because she'd been too paranoid to leave anything important at home. Is all of this yours? The guard asked, holding up a small zippered bag. Yes, Sarah said. He emptied it. Personal phone, dead batteries, a photograph, carefully anonymous, showing her in tactical gear that was too new, too clean. The photo went into an evidence bag. The battery went into another. Then the subpoena arrived by courier. Sarah's personal phone records for the last 18 months. Her credit card statements. Any communications with pharmacy staff. Any communications with the surgical team. The document was signed by a hospital attorney whose name appeared at the bottom, retained by Dr. Victoria Ashford, Chief of Surgery. Sarah watched Ashford make the final call from her office. The door was open. Deliberately open. So Sarah could hear every word. Yes, I'm reporting a dangerous practice incident, Ashford said into her phone, her voice steady and professional and weaponized with precision. Sarah Chen. RN credentialed at Seattle General. She performed procedures tonight outside her scope, field dressing techniques, medical judgment that could have caused harm. I believe her licensure should be reviewed immediately by the State Board. Yes, I have documentation. Yes, I'll send it over. The phone went down. Ashford turned and met Sarah's eyes across the hallway. She smiled. Small. Victorious. The smile of someone who had just finished dismantling a life and made it look like bureaucratic procedure. Sarah didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Just nodded, one shallow movement of her chin that conveyed nothing, that released nothing, that acknowledged the hit had landed and that she was still standing. That night, Sarah sat in her car in the parking garage. The engine was off. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with the sound of slowly dying filaments, and the sound felt like it was inside her chest. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, white-knuckled, because letting go meant admitting they were shaking. The Ranger's ring was in her palm. She'd removed it from his hand during the crisis, infection risk, she'd told herself, but it was a lie she told herself. She needed to see the inscription. 3 years of hiding, and she'd been right. The coordinates were there. Latitude and longitude burned into the gold, the exact location where her extraction team had gone sideways in Helmand Province. where Ashford had ordered her to leave 2 soldiers behind because extraction was tactically unsound. Where Sarah had taken that order and broken it into pieces and carried 2 bleeding Rangers 3 kilometers under fire until the medevac birds arrived. This ring belonged to one of them. This ring meant everything Sarah had buried was about to resurface. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. The charge nurse from the ICU, a Marine, always kind, one of the few people at Seattle General who'd treated her like a person instead of a phantom. The Ranger woke up. He's asking for Major Chen. Security flagged something in your background check, classified clearance attached to your number. Inquiry triggered. People are coming. Sarah, I don't know what's happening, but whatever you did, thank you. Sarah stared at the screen. The words blurred. She didn't cry. Crying was surrender. But her hands did tremble now, and the ring slipped between her fingers and dropped onto the rubber floor mat. When she reached down to retrieve it, her breath came in controlled measures, 2 seconds in, 4 seconds out, the breathing pattern of someone preparing for an extraction that might never come. They were coming. Federal. Military. The Pentagon doesn't ignore a classified clearance activation. The Pentagon doesn't ignore a decorated combat medic resurfacing after 3 years in the civilian world. They were coming. And Ashford had no idea that every move she'd made, every subpoena, every call, every calculated humiliation, had been building the case for her own exposure. The parking garage was silent except for the rain. Sarah sat in her car with the engine dead, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, the Ranger's ring clutched so hard in her fist that the metal edges cut into her palm. 3 years of invisible work. 3 years of buried credentials. 3 years of being nobody so that she could be safe. And now Ashford had erased even that. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. But inside, something had fractured, not the kind of break that shows, but the kind that runs deep, hairline thin, where the foundation was supposed to hold everything up. She couldn't move. Couldn't cry. The weight of it all pressed down like a helicopter rotor turning slowly, deliberately, grinding her into the seat. The rain hammered against the windshield like Morse code, and she sat there in the dark, a buried major in a borrowed life, holding a dead Ranger's ring, knowing that by tomorrow morning there would be nothing left to hide behind. The fabricated Social Security number would trigger federal flags. The classified clearance attached to a civilian nurse's file would set off alarms at the Pentagon. Everything she'd built to stay invisible was about to explode into light. Her phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times in rapid succession. She lifted her head. Her hands moved on autopilot, muscle memory from a different life, and she read the messages from the night charge nurse, John Doe awake. Asking for Major Chen. Asking by rank. Asking by name that didn't exist in any civilian database. Below that, a message flagged by hospital security, automated alert. Classified Department of Defense clearance detected. Associated with employee file Sarah Chen. Investigation initiated. Federal response ETA 2 hours. The rain continued. Sarah closed her eyes and waited. The conference room at Seattle General filled with the kind of authority that made the fluorescent light seem dimmer by contrast. Hospital administration sat along one side of the table, CEO Marcus Tebow, Chief Nursing Officer Rebecca Kim, the hospital's general counsel with her laptop open. Across from them, 2 federal agents in dark suits, neither introducing themselves. At the head of the table, still in dress Navy uniform, Commander James Briggs, SEAL Team 3, his presence like a tank idling in a garage, quiet but unmistakably dangerous. Sarah stood against the back wall, hands folded, wearing the same scrub she'd worked in for 12 hours. Nobody had told her she could sit. Ashford sat at the far end of the table, her posture rigid, her hands flat on the surface in front of her. She'd changed into a fresh lab coat. The move was calculated, look professional, look innocent, look like the senior physician in the room. But her jaw was clenched tight enough to break teeth. The first federal agent, a woman named Morrison with grey eyes and the calm of someone who'd ended careers before breakfast, opened a file. "We received notification this morning from the Department of Defense regarding an anomaly in the security database associated with this hospital's nursing staff. Our preliminary investigation has revealed several concerning patterns." She didn't look at Sarah. She looked at Ashford. Dr. Victoria Ashford, Chief of Surgery, is the common thread. Ashford's fingers flexed once. Just once. But Sarah saw it. The door opened. A young Army officer stepped in, Lieutenant Sarah Reeves, the Ranger's daughter, still in uniform from her base in Georgia. Behind her came the patient, supported on a cane, his left arm in a sling, his face still pale from blood loss but his eyes sharp as a knife edge. The hospital had moved him to a private room 20 minutes ago. Nobody had explained why. Lieutenant Reeves stood. Her voice was steady, the voice of someone trained to testify under fire. "Sir, with respect, that nurse saved my father's life. He was brought in from a traffic accident with massive internal bleeding and a tension pneumothorax. He codes. Flat line. Dr. Ashford wasn't in trauma bay. Major Chen was. And she improvised a field seal using an MRE wrapper and her training, and she got him to stable while Dr. Ashford watched from the doorway." The Ranger himself spoke, his voice rough from intubation but audible. "She pulled me out of Helmand. 3 clicks under fire. She's Major Sarah Chen." The room contracted. Every person at that table understood what had just been spoken into the record. Commander Briggs leaned forward. He opened a folder, not a laptop, not a tablet, but actual paper, the kind of documentation that came from classified archives. His voice didn't change. It never did. Sarah Chen. Enlisted 2011. Officer Candidate School 2013. Commissioned as Second Lieutenant, Infantry Branch. Promoted to Major in 2019. Assigned to 75th Ranger Regiment, Bravo Company. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Helmand Province, 2017 through 2018. Each sentence landed like ordnance. Bronze Star for Valor, 2017. Silver Star for Exceptional Bravery in Combat, 2018. Purple Heart, twice. Promoted to Major in the field. And a Distinguished Service Cross for an operation you will never read about in any public database. He paused. The silence filled the room like water rising. Major Chen was court-martialed in 2018 by Colonel Victoria Ashford, then assigned as Deputy Commander of her Joint Task Force. The charge was insubordination. The specification was disobeying a direct order to abandon 2 wounded Rangers in Helmand Province during an extraction gone sideways. Ashford ordered the exfil. Major Chen refused. She carried those 2 Rangers 3 kilometers under active enemy fire. She was acquitted on appeal when the Rangers testified. Both of them. He turned a page. Nobody breathed. After acquittal, Major Chen was ordered into deep cover by JSOC Command for her protection and ours. Her original military identity was sealed. New civilian credentials were established. She was placed in the civilian healthcare sector to maintain her medical skills while remaining invisible to any adversary with knowledge of her service record. She has served in that capacity for 3 years. Until Dr. Ashford's arrival at this hospital 4 weeks ago. Ashford stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor like a scream. "This is absurd. I don't know anything about." The second federal agent, whose name was Walker and whose eyes had never left Ashford's hands, placed a tablet on the table and turned it toward her. Dr. Ashford has attempted to delete 14 hours of security footage from the controlled substance storage area of this hospital. Footage from the nights of October 12th, 17th, 23rd, and 28th. In those recordings, Dr. Ashford meets with Gregory Mills, a pharmaceutical sales representative now under federal indictment for opioid diversion, conspiracy to traffic in controlled substances, and conspiracy to defraud the DEA. The video played. Soundless. Grainy but clear. Ashford in the pharmaceutical storage room. Mills beside her. A controlled substance log visible on the counter. Cash exchanging hands in one sequence, tight shot, timestamp visible. Your hospital IT administrator, Marcus Torres, Marine Corps veteran, 6 years active duty, noticed the deletion attempts on the backup server. Preserved every frame. Reported you to federal authorities this morning. The investigation into Dr. Mills has been ongoing for 8 months. You appear in 37 of the surveillance clips. Ashford's hands gripped the table edge. The knuckles went white. That's a misunderstanding. Mills approached me. I was gathering evidence for you people. I was trying to. Commander Briggs pulled a folder from the stack in front of him. His voice remained level. Major Chen has documented every meeting between you and Mr. Mills. She photographed your interactions. She built a timeline. She's been constructing this case for the past 2 weeks while you systematically attempted to restrict her access to patient care, filed fraudulent complaints against her license, and coordinated with your legal team to expedite her termination. He slid a stack of photographs across the table. Ashford and Mills. Ashford and Mills again. Timestamps, dates, locations. Sarah's handwriting in the margins, precise, military, annotated with details only someone trained in intelligence work would capture. Dr. Ashford, you're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to divert controlled substances and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. The federal agent stood. Torres appeared in the doorway, broad-shouldered, silent, the kind of presence that comes from having worn a uniform, and he nodded once at Sarah. Ashford was read her rights in the conference room. She was escorted out by hospital security. Her lab coat was removed. Her office was packed into a cardboard box, the irony wasn't subtle, and she was escorted from the building by 2 officers with Federal Bureau of Investigation badges. The CEO didn't watch her leave. He was looking at Sarah instead. So was Commander Briggs. So was Lieutenant Reeves. So was the Ranger himself, his eyes clear and focused for the first time since he'd been wheeled into Trauma Bay. The Ranger extended his hand. His grip was firm despite the 4-line running into the crook of his elbow and the pain that had to be screaming through his chest. "Welcome back, Major." Sarah didn't flinch. She returned the grip, measured, controlled. "Stay alive, Ranger." In the lobby 3 hours later, sunlight broke through Jacksonville's clouds like a revelation. Gold light streamed through the glass doors, and the rain that had hammered the parking garage all night had transformed into something clear and new. The Ranger stood beside his daughter, the cane supporting his weight, his sling adjusted. He lifted his free hand and pressed something into Sarah's palm. The ring. The unit ring with the Helmand Province coordinates, the weight of it small but significant, a physical object that proved a ghost had existed. "Keep it," he said. His voice was still rough but stronger now. "You earned that more than I did, Major." Sarah closed her fingers around it. She didn't refuse. She didn't argue. She simply held it and understood that some things you carry for other people because they've already carried what they can. Lieutenant Reeves saluted her, a proper salute, a military one, recognizing rank and service. Sarah returned it with the same precision she'd used on 100 battlefields. The break room that had gone silent when she entered now filled with questions and requests and something that tasted like respect. Marcus Torres from IT approached her with his hand extended, his bearing still military despite the civilian polo shirt. "Semper Fi, Major. Glad I could help." His words carried the weight of understanding. He'd preserved the evidence, documented the pattern, kept the record clean. "Thank you, Corporal," Sarah said, and the use of his rank was an acknowledgement that some identities stayed true even in civilian clothes. Through the lobby windows, across the street at a strip mall clinic, Sarah could see a figure in a security guard uniform checking IDs at the entrance. Ashford. Working nights at an urgent care clinic, graveyard shifts, the kind of position that came with almost no authority and even less respect. The Pentagon had made sure that message was delivered quietly. Sarah turned back to the Ranger and his daughter. A young nurse approached nervously, her name tag reading Jennifer Pierce. First shift in the ICU tomorrow. Her hands were trembling slightly. Major Chen? I'm terrified. Do you have any advice? Sarah considered the question. She thought about 3 years of invisibility. She thought about the weight of a ring. She thought about the difference between hiding and serving. Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help, she said. From her uniform pocket, she withdrew something she'd kept since Helmand, a small insignia pin, worn smooth from handling, a combat medic's emblem. She pinned it to Jennifer's scrub pocket. Remember that, and you'll be fine. The winter sun continued to break through the clouds, casting everything in gold. The lobby of Seattle General Hospital, once a place where a major in hiding had worked in silence, had become a place where her presence changed the air itself. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know the truth about quiet strength. Subscribe to watch more untold stories of people whose power was never measured in titles. Like this video, comment with the truth. Have you ever been completely misjudged by someone who had no idea who you really were? And share this story with someone who needs to know they're never truly invisible.